Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm back here again. It is a Tuesday evening, and I have my good friend Roderick Edwards here. We're going to talk tonight about something that we have not talked about in quite a while. As a matter of fact, it's something that you don't hear mentioned very often, and that's going to be the subject of church authority. Usually I try to stick to eschatology themes and like prophecy, biblical eschatology. But I feel this issue of church authority, something, kind of ties into those themes, because a lot of times we get our doctrines from churches, from our local churches and from our denominational churches. And of course, there's a lot of issues that have been going on within the religious world, within the, Christian apologetics world, that all tie back to church authority. And so I'm going to let Roderick kick this off. Roderick, how are you? It's good to see you.
How are you? Yes, a little warm here in Florida. Spent most of the day, this is kind of pleasant, spent most of the day working, having my car worked on for brakes. And the reason why that's important to mention is because a lot of us are living in the practical world. We don't have time to obviously sit for hours and hours reading our Bibles, studying the most fine minutia of the pluperfect word of, whatever Greek or Hebrew or Latin word we want to look at. We don't really have time for that. So historically, the common man has relied upon the clergy, the church, the churchmen. And I know our things called the churchmen versus the laymen. I mean, we're not trying to necessarily put a battle here, but kind of get somebody's attention. So that's the reason we've used that title. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Not so much necessarily church authority, but just the dichotomy between, I want to call them seminarians or people that are higher up in the church governance or hierarchy, compared to the Joe Schmo out here, trying to make a living and they reads his Bible, goes to church, however you do it to try to have your faith expressed, compared to the person that has hours and hours on end to study every minutia detail in the Bible. There's definitely a divide there, right?
Oh yeah, there's a divide. There's always been a divide, I think, between the clergy and the laity. It seems like the divide is getting more extreme though. In this time in which we're living now, it seemed like for a while there, the pew was really becoming very conversant in the biblical doctrine. We're talking like the first half of the 20th century. And then it seemed like there's a rift that's occurring. Now you have these theologians that are spinning, new theories, and the pew is getting harder for the pew to keep up with them. And so I think the rift is growing. I know you wanted to talk about the Protestant Reformation, bring this all the way back to Luther's time, because a lot of people will accuse Luther of opening this can of worms of private interpretation, private judgment. It's hard to get all those worms back in the can. Once you've opened that Pandora's box, so to speak, and all the things fly out, it's kind of hard to contain everything again. Do you think Luther opened up a can of worms when he instituted, that principle of private judgment?
Well, it definitely was a simpler time, obviously, before the Protestant Reformation, because basically you had the Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox and some smaller factional groups, but those were the two expressions of Christianity for a long time. And so, and especially since a lot of people were illiterate at the time, they had to rely upon the clergy to tell them what it said, to tell them what the Bible said. As a matter of fact, a lot of the services were held in Latin. So you'd go to church and you'd hear the priest mumbling or the choir, and you didn't understand anything that was going on. You just sat there and yes, I must be a sinner. You didn't do any of that stuff. And so not just Luther, but we know the Reformation was leading up to Luther. Luther's kind of become the whipping boy for the Reformation. There was John Wycliffe and all those before him, the Huss before him. So you had all these people before him coming to this direction. But yes, Luther and all the reformers opened it up to the common man as more and more translations of the Bible got into the common languages. And that's where we start at. But before I go on, do you have anything else to add to that before I go on? I didn't want to just talk and talk and talk.
No, other than the fact that, Gutenberg's invention of the printing press, which puts us where we are today, where the common man like myself can own a library of volumes and study, don't even have to leave the house.
Yes.
And pretty much get a complete theological library, a complete research library in my own home.
And then the advent of the internet.
Thank you, Mr. Gutenberg.
Yes. and the advent of the internet caused that as well. Well, I obviously started out with Luther writing pamphlets. Actually, he didn't write too many. People would hear what he's saying or what he's preaching, and they would write them all down, and then they would pass them out to local German, German people who could actually read that. So that's how it really started, how people started becoming theological. The common man started becoming theological, at least in Germany, is where they're reading his pamphlets about certain things. But a lot of people don't realize that it wasn't just because there's like, I don't want to call them neo-reformed people nowadays. There's these guys who, hey, I'm reformed. It's the first time they heard about Luther, first time they heard about, and they just run with it. And they almost used Luther in the Reformation as a bailiwick or a hammer. They try to hit everybody with it. A lot of Calvinists get pegged with that kind of mentality. Once they become Calvinists, they like to Calvinize everything. But while this was going on, while Luther and some of the other reformers were trying to understand where they all fit in now, there was another group called the Radical Reformers. Matter of fact, this guy named Andreas Karlstadt was Luther's, basically his superior at the Wittenberg College there, where he was and gave Luther his doctorate, basically, awarded him his doctorate. But he went off what we might call the deep end. He's basically said, hey, I'm going to shed all these clergy clothes and I'm going to wear a brown smock. Somebody made fun of the little logo you have here because I was wearing a brown shirt. It wasn't on purpose. I purposely wore a nice bright green one today, so that wouldn't be an accusation. But Andre Karlstadt, he said, look, I don't want to be considered a clergy. Just call me Brother Andreas. And he wore a smock. And Luther said, your approach is not going to help the common man understand the theology better, a matter of fact, or the preacher better. It's what it's going to do is water down the preacher so he's more like the common man. So Luther kind of stood in the gap between the high church clergy and the radical reformers of Andre Karlstadt and some of the others going on. And a lot of people don't know anything about them. That's where they came from. We need to probably understand them more, because how far is too far is the question here. I think we should ask that. That's probably the theme. How far is too far for the common average Joe to open up his Bible, read it for himself, and come to his own conclusions? Because it was easier back in the old days, because the church said, we get to tell you what the Bible says and how to interpret it. Then Luther comes along and says, no, we get to. But then sometimes you had some people interpreting, like Andre Karlstadt and some other ones, Thomas Muntzer, interpreting the scriptures in a way that even Luther didn't like. So Luther put the brakes on them. Was he justified for doing that?
Well, possibly he was. I think there's a substratum of truth which you could see, running throughout Christian history. And I think it's good to keep in touch with that basic foundation of truth. Even the creeds, and I don't like to, I'm not a big, creedalist, but the creeds do contain that form of doctrine that has been held by the historic church. So I think those who pick up their Bibles and seek to understand it with that in mind, that there's a collective understanding that runs throughout church history. I think that kind of mindset is not bad. It can be actually very helpful. The kind of mindset that you're talking about is something that we've seen so often over the years among hyper preterists and full preterists, whatever you want to call them, where they'll just pick up the Bible and they'll say, okay, I've got some new interpretation that nobody's ever preached before, nobody's ever taught. You can't find it in any church history, you can't find it in any ecclesiastical writer, but this is the truth. So it's like, well, what was God doing for the past 2,000 years? That's a kind of radical reformed approach where, you're taking the scriptures alone, sola scriptura, but it becomes a sort of a solo scriptura where you're using just the Bible, and basically you're becoming your own sort of a pope. The Pope is you, with the Bible in your hand. And you got another Pope down the street saying, no, it's my understanding that's true. So you get these little religious wars. But yeah, I agree with you, Roderick.
That's definitely a can of worms. So since you mentioned the hyper-preterism, I'll do a little plug here. Obviously, you may have mentioned this last time. I think that I've written 4 books on preterism, not just hyper-preterism, but preterism in general, because I think it all leads to the same place. They're using the same proof text. Which leads me to what I'm doing right now, what you mentioned here. I'm getting ready to write a book that kind of addresses the difference between what I call historical Christianity and biblical Christianity. And what I mean by that is kind of what you said here. When you look at these threads, there's certain things in historical Christianity, no matter what denomination you look at, not just Roman Catholic, but all of it, just forget about the creeds and confessions for a minute. Even without those, there's a historical thread we can find through how they've understood various basic doctrines. And then if you take the Bible and divorce it from all that, and you read it in a vacuum, you might come to a completely different conclusion. And so basically this new book that I'm working on is about that kind of difference. And I'm not, and again, in this book, I really don't even say where I come down. I'm just saying, here it is. Let's examine it all. So just a little plug there on the side.
Right, well, I'll be looking forward to that book, and the previous ones that you've written on preterism were very helpful. Some great material in there. So everybody watching this, you can go ahead and order those books on Amazon because they're very helpful. You're going to get a lot of information from them. But this idea with radical reformation and with interpreting the scriptures in a vacuum, we see that more and more today. But then we see another push, or I guess another movement, as it were, going in an opposite direction and going toward a high church, or maybe not even high church, but a more authoritative ecclesiasticism, where now you're almost like abandoning your faith altogether and just believing implicitly in an institution or an authoritative individual. And I think that can be a little bit dangerous as well, because now that's almost going back to Mother Rome. What do you think about that?
Yeah. On top of that, it seems like there's like different institutions, seminaries are battling each other. We have more authority, we have more clout than you do, so we get to tell you, or you're not really you've never even pastored, you're just some guy in a ministry. We've seen some of that going on here recently, where you're just some guy in a ministry, and we actually have studied, we got doctorates, we got degrees behind our name, you do not. So basically you need to shut up and submit to us. There's a lot of that going on as well. And so a lot of, for example, one of the debates is about the body. And now I'm probably getting myself in trouble here. In the resurrection, the scriptures talk about a body, 1 Corinthians 15. The creeds and confessions often talk about a body, but what they don't talk about necessarily, maybe some of the creeds and confessions do at some points, this is called self-same body. This concept that the actual body you have now is going to be risen from the dead and taken to heaven. And it's going to be that self-same body. See, just like Jesus. I always found that odd, not saying what I believe, I just found that odd that they're so adamant that it has to be the self-same body and that our bodies will become glorified in such a way. Well, Jesus, poor Jesus, he got crucified, he got speared in the side, but from what I understand, when he rose to heaven, he still had the nail prints. He still had the in his side. But somehow you and I are going to have every freckle and mole that we don't like, and we're going to have these glorified, beautiful bodies, but Jesus has to stick with the body that got damaged. Somehow we're not going to have the damage. We're not. If you're in a wheelchair, when you get to heaven, you can walk. If you have cerebral palsy, you're not going to have that when you get to heaven. You're not going to have any of these ailments according to these people, but you're going to have the self-same body. I think that's not necessarily the hill to die on. I know, hey, you're a heretic if you don't sell same body. But this is what I'm talking about. These debates are going on in these seminaries, these high churches. That's just one example of them. And then they fight each other, and then they go to ministries that aren't towing the line, and they attack those ministries and tell them they're heretics, and they attack all their supporters as heretics.
Right. Yeah. I've seen a lot of that recently myself. I think it's almost like a theological snobbery, looking down your nose hairs at someone because maybe you have a diploma or something. And this is the way I've always looked at it. Look, I don't have, any theological degrees, but I've always said, you don't have to be a professional politician to discourse intelligently upon politics, nor do you have to be a professional theologian to discourse intelligently upon theology. Some of the best political discussions I've had, I don't want to get into politics, they have come from people who, they see what's going on. They know the difference between right and wrong. They know the different issues that are at stake, and they could see it because they understand the issues from a practical level. Whereas somebody who's in their ivory tower, spinning theories, they may be producing great books and dissertations and theses and the like, but they don't have that kind of, they're not on the ground.
Right. We talked about in the beginning. I've got my breaks fixed. They don't live in a practical world. So.
Right. Yeah, it's that academic, I guess you would call it, ivory tower elitism. And this is something that Will Durant spoke about when he wrote his book, The Story of Philosophy, tied everything together, brought it down to the common level, gave a complete outline of philosophy. And in his introduction, he said that knowledge was being regained for the first time in centuries H.G. Wells, he brought that to the front in his outline of history. But anyways, this was lost, I guess, after World War II. People got tired of outlines, people got tired of synopses, and they started, analyzing and splitting and cutting and putting everything under the microscope again. But ivory tower elitism, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't work on the ground, though. That's the problem, and it needs to work on the ground level.
Let me address something you said here, because I'm sure there's somebody out here going, wait a minute, because I've seen this analogy before. Well, you say, you're okay with a politician or a non-politician talking about politics, but they're not the expert. So therefore, would you accept a surgery from somebody who's not a verified doctor who has a degree in surgery, in operations? Well, see, you wouldn't do that. No. So why are you applying that wrong concept into theology? Well, here's the difference. That's not the really application. The application is this. It's more like, will I go to somebody who has a pharmacological solution, or will I go to an herbalist who might have a more natural but yet older solution? That's the difference, I think. It's not so much this person has a degree and I have to listen to him, and this person doesn't, so I shouldn't listen to him. Or this person's a certified mechanic, but this guy just works in his garage. He knows what he's doing. That's not the difference. The difference is more, I don't know if you call it nuance, because I hate that word, because the liberals use that word a lot, but it's more of this pharmacological versus the herbalist in this regard. So.
Right. And two, also, Roderick, we wouldn't want to go to a doctor who had just invented a new theory but had never tested it before.
Right.
Even though they had invented, they come up with this beautiful theory, had written a thesis, 900 pages thick, but it's not been tested. You would go to the doctor who had already done this, who had done these cures, 150 times,
right?
Because of that empirical knowledge and because of the practical experience.
Right.
So sometimes practical experience does trump theoretical, expertise.
Well, the very basis of science is applying your theory, and if you kept the same result over and over and over, then it becomes like gravity. I throw something up, it comes back down. I throw it comes back down. We don't necessarily know where gravity comes from. Some people think it's the iron core, it's a centrifugal force of the earth. Even scientists don't know what actually causes it. They have theories, but they do know there is gravity on Earth. So because it can be repeated, it's a repeated process.
Right. I think you're right, and I think the attitude should be it's okay to be in an ivory tower, it's okay to spin theories, it's okay to be it's theoretical, but you also have to do some ground. You have to be in the field a little bit. You have to get mixed among the common people. You have to learn their idiom. You have to learn what they're thinking, and sometimes you'll learn something, but oftentimes what you'll gain that base experience of that human experience that you can bring back to the table with you. That's going to help you a lot. It's like anything else, when you're a politician and you're running for office, these politicians, they go to different towns and they stop in the diner, they shake people's hands. They don't just issue fiats from an ivory tower, and papal bulls. They actually have to get out there and meet people. And the problem today is you've got a lot of theologians that are really snooty, and they have this attitude like, well, they're the experts. They can issue fiats, and they can issue, manifestos, as it were, but they don't want to have anything to do with the people. And the people, oftentimes, they've got the common sense and the practical experience that somebody who's never known anything but an ivory tower, never went to school, never had a full-time job, working with their hands or whatever, it's a rift, it's a divide. It's between the higher ups and the people, the common masses. And it's always going to be, the more you, the more you foster that divide, the worse the ultimate division is going to be. So it's something that people need to do. They need to reach out more, and they need to mix more with the populace.
Right. And Jesus used parables, and he could use them effectively because they made sense to him. He lived the parables. He wasn't in an ivory tower where he didn't understand what it means to gore your neighbor's ox and all these things. He understood all that. So therefore he could use parables, and the people understood him because they made sense to him. His theology was practical before it was theoretical. let's going to move on to something a little bit different here, because one thing that the seminarians or the clergy want, we talked about the Reformation, how the Bible became common, where people could get to and access themselves. They didn't wait on the clergy to tell what it meant. And so we have, if you know a little bit, I'm not going to go through the whole history of the English Bible, but you have William Tyndale, and then the King James. You have the Geneva Bible that came to it. That's the one that really came to America. But my thing is, for example, look at the King James. King James we had for a long time. A lot of people use that and they love it. It's a very straightforward. They call it formal equivalence, or formal because it's more literal. Whereas you have the dynamic equivalence is more trying to get to the meaning of the words behind it, rather than not necessarily every word translated correctly. But for the longest time, the King James had things like the word world translated, where it should clearly age or ion, it's the age. And it really caused a lot of bad doctrine, especially when you talk about eschatology. And things like the word Easter, which I think that might be one of the only translations the word Easter appears in the Bible, when really, when you look at that word, it's Passover. It has nothing to do with Easter at all. Easter was a pagan holiday, and obviously that had nothing to do with that. So my point is, the clergy so much wanted us to have the Bible in our own hands, and then we got it in our own hands, they're upset because we don't interpret it correctly. They want to interpret it still. So it's almost like we said about popes. It's like they became a miniature version of the Pope in Rome. Go ahead and let you chime in there so I don't blather on forever.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I guess the part about the clergy, that's sort of like a thorny issue, because now you're getting into denominations. Well, so, we got one group saying, well, we're the ones who can interpret the Bible correctly. It's our clergy versus your clergy. So, I've been in the Baptist church for about 20 years, and I was actually raised in the RCC for the first 29 years of my life. So I was used to that big ecclesiastical sort of thing. But then, of course, when I got baptized and saved and all that, joined the Baptist church, well, the Baptists, they won't listen to, say, Methodists. Methodists, they won't listen to the Episcopalians. The Episcopalians, they won't listen to anybody. They'll listen to their own leaders and teachers. The Presbyterians, they're very, some of those smaller denominations are very militant. They won't listen to, it's basically, hey, we are the ones, we are the true church. And it sort of reminds me of the Baptist bride. I guess you could call it a heresy, because it kind of is, where it's like only the Baptist church is the true bride. Everybody else is sort of outside the pale. So it's like, well, how do you solve that? Because, yeah, okay, the clergy, has their issues, and it's not just, dealing with the common people, but where do you solve the issue of all these different, clergies, fighting with each other as to who has the authority to, if there is an authority, to interpret the word of God for the people.
The many popes. It gets worse, because if you look in the Bible, it doesn't seem to imply that the church is going to be ran by a single pastor. We held the whole Roman Catholic bishop thing. The bishop was in charge of entire cities. And so it kind of carried over into the Protestant Reformation, where you had Luther, deciding who could be ordained in the Reformed faith. Matter of fact, he told Andreas Karlstadt at some point that he wasn't allowed to preach anymore, because even though Andre Karlstadt probably had more doctorate degrees than Luther had, so who gets to decide who gets preach? So even the way we structured our churches nowadays, with a single man at the front, and his deacons, or sometimes they have elders, but they really don't do much. So then you obviously get the Presbyterian, which they have the ruling elders and the teaching elders, but it still comes down to one man. I'm not certain if that's American problem, but as we go back history, it doesn't. But obviously now in America, you have the 501c3s, where basically, if you're going to be a church, you have to incorporate like a business. You have to have the CEO at the top. You have to have the that's I'm looking here, the board, and then the shareholders, which is obviously the congregation. So it's really structured like a business, not like a church. And so there's that problem. And I remember this one time, I was when I was younger, probably 19, I was working at a car washer, I think it was, and this preacher came in, and I was getting his car ready for him, and I called him Mr. whatever his name, Mr. Smith. No, I'm Reverend Smith. I'm thinking, that has no relevance to what we're doing here. Maybe if you're at your church, I'm thinking, and he was just adamant that I call him Reverend, the revered one, in a car wash situation. So it was just, that was my awakening to something's not right here. This two-tiered class system going on.
Yeah, that reminds me, Roderick, of something that A.W. Pink wrote a long time ago. He wouldn't let anybody call him doctor because he says that's like calling someone rabbi. And he said, he wouldn't let anybody call him reverend either because he said reverend is only used once in the scriptures and it's referring to God. It's in one of the Psalms. I think it's holy and reverend is his name. I forget which Psalm it is, but so yeah, it's that abnegation of, I guess, of being in an elite class, which is very becoming, I think, in a man of God, because I think even Peter said, I think the word that he uses in one of his epistles is said, ye are God's clergy. I forget the actual English word that translates that word, but he was talking about all the saints being of one, no divisions between clergy and laity. And even like the issue with priesthood, are there priests in the church? Well, Irenaeus wrote the 2nd century, he said, all of the righteous possess the sacerdotal rank. So this whole idea of priests and priestly assumption, this didn't creep in until later. And it did create that rift. It created that divide between, say, the lower unlettered classes, which couldn't, like you said, couldn't read for themselves, and then an elite class of men who had to interpret the Bible for these people. Now, in a society, in an agricultural society, that may be the best way to go because, again, if you can't read, if your people can't read, if they're mechanics or laborers or agriculturalists, then they're going to need somebody to stand in the gap for them and authoritatively interpret scripture. That can also become an abuse when you have people lording over and dominating over their brethren in I would say, in an unchristian and irresponsible manner. And that's, of course, the abuses of history show us that.
Right. And then you had Luther back in the Reformation advocating this thing that we've all heard of, the sainthood of or the priesthood of the believers. There we go. The priesthood of the believers. And again, Andre Karlstadt and some of the radical reformers taking it further than Luther wanted them to take it. No, don't take it that far. You don't really. And the whole concept of the Roman Catholic, you get sainted, you get sainthood. We're all supposedly saints. We don't need inference by a pope to make us saints. So that's different. I almost lost my point here about that. Okay, let's move on, and it'll come back.
Clothing, Roderick, clerical collars.
Yeah, there we go.
Marks of visible marks of distinction. Do those fit in? I know. There's been a couple of guys out there that I'm not known names or anything like that, but they're always, every time you see them, they're always dressed in in
a uniform
attire, but they're Protestants. They claim to be Reformed, but you wouldn't know any difference between them and, say, a Catholic priest.
Right. They have to wear their dark suits and their big long beards so they look authoritative. I call it the Gandalf look because it's what is this? I mean, I get that, but you're in a practical world now. With the practical purpose, I had my brakes fixed today. I didn't go in and see some guy in the Gandalf. I am here to fix your brakes, waving his wand or anything like that. He was just some guy like me, and he fixed my brakes. When I go to talk to somebody about the Bible, I don't want somebody who wow, what kind of world does he live in? How does he exist in that world? Because most guys with a big long beard this long and wearing all that weird stuff is not going to be able to walk around in common everyday average life and go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac or whatever. It's not going to look right. It's going to be completely out of place. And so we've carried some of this priesthood concepts over from not only Roman Catholics but Judaism. And I imagine Peter, and especially Peter, he was a fisherman. I imagine even in his own language, he was grammatically incorrect when he spoke. He probably used profanity, Jewish profanity, when he spoke, things like that. But here, and they even speak with this erudite accent a lot of times. Like, wait a minute, aren't you from Maine? Why are you speaking that way? It's almost like they have an English accent. I don't get it. So yeah, that whole air of the clothing and the look. I get why they're doing it because they have to look authoritative, but it to me, it puts me really, I'm already suspect as soon as I see that.
Right. Almost like the very theatrical, almost savors of showmanship.
Right.
You've got showmanship on the one hand. You've got people like Joel Osteen, performing, hitting people with the Holy Spirit. There's that kind of showmanship. But then you've got the more elite intellectual kind of showmanship, the kind that you're talking about, with the clerical collars and the affectation of a phony British accent. And this is something to think about because as Christ told us, I believe in Matthew chapter 6, that our religion is not supposed to be for show. It's not
Right.
supposed to be for, for spectacle. It's supposed to be, straight from the heart, and it's supposed to be the real thing. You'd rather you go into the closet and pray than that someone should hear your many words and your dilated, uh, you know, um,
Doing
uh,
your alms in public corners and stuff like that. Yes.
yeah,
Well, there's the
yeah,
other side of that. Let me get the other side. So there's the other side of it. This, and usually this you can tell some guy who wants to be a preacher of some sort, and he's got the gauged ears and the neck tattoos and tattoos across. I'm not trying to say anything about tattoos, but he's purposely trying to look, like he's rough, like hey, and he may be, he may have been an ex-convict, who knows? But a lot of times I see like these, they're purposely trying to look too average or too worldly. So it's okay to be worldly. I get the concept between the both. You don't want to too worldly, but at the same time, you don't want to have this fake, like you said, theatric going on either. So
I see a lot of that within certain circles. What do you think's what's the solution, Roderick? Because it seems like we have this growing divide between churchmen and laymen, and that's just one aspect of it. Is appearance. What's the solution? Is there a solution, or is this divide going to get worse over time?
as we saw, you said earlier on, you made allusion to that it's gotten better and worse at different times in history. Again, when the Lutherans first started interacting with their people, they were a lot of the time illiterate, so they'd use these, they call them mass books or missals. Maybe you've used these in Greek Orthodox churches or Roman Catholic, where the preacher will stand up there in your own language and speak something, and then the clergy speaks back, so it be the Lord, blah blah blah. But even that, I don't think is necessary anymore, because we can all read. Most of us can read in our native languages. So why are we repeating back what they say? Well, because that's part of the worship. I'm not so certain. And then we live in this day and age of the electronic or internet age. So when people, well, I know the pluperfect of this Greek word and this what it really means, it really puts me off, because if I can't look and open a Bible, a basic Bible. That's the reason I'm talking about the King James. But if I can open up a basic Bible and find out the basic meaning of a doctrine and word and come to that same conclusion, but yet some high-ranking seminarian says, well, no, here's what it really means. Well, then why am I even reading it? If now God is out of my reach, unless I become like you and spend 6 hours a day at some seminary reading, it really puts me off. I don't even want to have anything to do with your God or your version of God, because I can't reach him. He's too far away from me. So I think the solution is get out of your seminaries a little bit, get out and interact with people. There's been so many go, well, I don't want to get these dirty fights. Well, sometimes these dirty fights are necessary. Their church was not, the church and the whole concept of church and the Christian faith was not developed in this pristine. There was fights all the time to hash out these doctrines, and they were needed, about the whole, is the hypostatic union true, or is the Trinity true? And they fought for a long time to get some of these stuff working out, and the practical stuff. And there's still some things to fight about, and still stuff to refight about, because we forgot about it. So that's fine. But that might be the solution. I don't know. I'm not nobody. I don't care whether you have the long beard and the English accent, or if you're some Joe Schmo like me who got my brakes fixed today. We still all need to be part of that discussion.
Right. It seems like it's come for. It seems like the Christianity has come full circle back to where it was, in first century Judaism, where you had the different sects. You had the Sadducees, then you had the Pharisees, you had the Herodians, you had the Essenes. And it seems like, the way what Judaism was in the first century, with all of its sects and divisions, that seems to me what Christianity has become now. Because you've got, on the one hand, you've got, like, say, the futurists, dispensational or whatever. And then on the other hand, you've got another group that's saying, well, everything's fulfilled, and we got to spiritualize all these passages. And you've got another group that says, well, you've got all these different camps, and there's not a lot of amity. There's not a lot of warfare going on, but it seems almost like, we've missed the real meaning of it all, as far as, Jesus Christ and his teachings, because very few people will actually stand from the pulpit and say, hey, we're going to be judged one day by our fruits. The fruit determines a tree. If I want to find out if it's a pear tree, I'm going to look at the fruit, if it's pears growing on it. If I want to find out if something's an orange tree, the first thing I'm going to do is look at the fruit, see if it's producing that fruit. Ultimately, if our religion isn't making us better as human beings, if our religion isn't producing the character that Christ has already given us to adopt, then it's not going to work. So you have all these religious wars. What's the end game? Is it to conform everybody to a certain to a belief system, or is it really to help people to grow in grace so that the church can get some unity back into the church, so that the body can be a full measure of the stature of Christ? What's the
Right.
end?
Well, obviously, factions, as the Bible said, factions must come to show those are approved. And that's reason some people quote that as, hey, where are the approved ones over here? That kind of stuff. But I think it's still going to happen, the paring away of nurturing the trees with fruit on them. So you're going to have that. But we got to the point where we have the faith of the thief on the cross, who basically, I'm going to be in heaven with you today. And then you have which are kind of a milk drinker kind of faith, which is fine. Then you have to me, all the way to the other side, they're not just eating meat. The seminarians, they're eating caviar. Well, up here, and we can't have that. There's a division. It's not even division so much of denominations or knowledge. It's the divisions on, I think I'm better than you because I know more about the Bible than you do. You don't really. We all have it. We all have. Again, I like the simple faith. Person says, I don't know what the eschatology is. I don't know. All I know is I need to treat my fellow man with some kind of dignity and respect, live my life where I'm honorable to people I'm interacting with, and all that other stuff. God will have to sort out. That's the kind of people I look for. That kind of Christian, not somebody who's, well, what do you think about these 3 questions? If you don't have these right, then you're going to hell. Those kind of people are not the ones I want to hang around. So
right. I agree.
I don't know if that's the solution or not, but that's the direction at least I'm moving in.
I agree. As a matter of fact, I've been out of organized Christianity for quite a while. I work Sundays now, so it's hard for me to get to church. But
Heathen, you work on the Lord's Day?
I work. Well, I think every day is the Lord's Day. See, that's the thing. You don't.
No, you got to pick
one day out of the week. You could worship him any time of the week.
Yeah, of course.
That's the whole idea of one day. Saturday, Sunday.
The Sabbath.
Is to me
Christian Sabbath.
Yeah, it's I don't believe that, but it's fine. If you want to worship God on Sunday, worship God on Sunday. If you want to worship him on Wednesday, worship him on Wednesday. But I've been out of the organized thing for a long time, only because I saw a lot of I like to pretend stuff. I like, if something's real, I will stand first in line and I will follow it. I'll be the fastest person to follow it. But I don't like to pretend stuff. So a lot of this is just, to me, it's just playing house. It's like, okay, well, we come in the room, and then we open our hymn books, and we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do this. Okay, and then we sit down and we listen to somebody speak for an hour, and then we go home, and then that's not what justifies people. That's not what sanctifies people. So for me, if it's not real, I don't like to follow it. Now, all this division, to me, only highlights the unreality of it all, because if you're going to have, this sect over here and then that sect over there, and they're all telling you something different, ultimately, at the end of the day, if the Bible student, or if the Christian, the average Joe Blow can make a decision at the end of the day, and their decision is, I'm going to follow this guy, I'm going to follow that guy. The decision is theirs at the end of the day. There's really no authority, because ultimately you, me, whoever is going to decide what they want, what works best for them. And so all this stuff about authority, I think it's okay to have authority. And I think there is such a thing as church authority. But I think that we need to put everything in perspective, realize that authority is a little bit relative in some areas, because I could listen to a Calvinist, and I like some forms of Calvinistic preaching. Mm-hmm. I could listen to an Armenian too. I could get something from them, but I'm not going to be, told that, well, you have to be in this little division here, this little cubicle. That's going to be your house forever. I don't like that.
Since we're talking about the Reformation, kind of tying all this together and bring it to an end, maybe, unless you have some more to say. A lot of people think Martin Luther, when he was standing before the Roman Catholics, and they're basically saying, recant. And he basically saying, here I stand, unless I'm convinced by scripture. Well, he didn't just say that. A lot of times people cut it off there. I'm not going to recant. That's not what he said. He says, unless I'm convinced by scripture, plain reason, or my conscience, he can't do it. So he put all those things in together. And a lot of people say, well, no, you need to go just read scripture only, or you need to, plain reason only, or you need to have your conscience only, which, you kind of make up your own kind of faith. All those things have to work together. And I think you just articulated, but I want to put Luther's words to it, that, on the end of the day, you can stand over us with your big long beards and your black hats and things and tell us that you got to do what we say or else. But unless my conscience, my plain reason, and scripture says those three things, I can't do it. I stand. I can do no other. That's what I'm going to say every time.
Right. And this reminds me of American, the principles upon which America was founded, that principle of, private judgment, not only private judgment, the principle of using reason.
Yep.
Religion can be reason, has to be reasonable. It has to be in accord with the dictates of reason. So you had all these priestly doctrines, transubstantiation, it was very difficult to plant those doctrines on American soil, because you had people fleeing Europe to get some religious freedom where they could finally settle down and worship according to the dictates of their conscience. And so then you had people, you eventually had those doctrines planted on American soil. You had the big church, Roman Catholic Church, come to the United States, but it's always been an uphill battle for them until recent years. It's always been more of an individualistic sort of Christianity. In the United States, you have you got a Unitarian church on the corner, then down the street you got a Baptist church, you've got a Methodist church, on the next block. But what I'm seeing right now is I'm seeing these old, and it may be because of the internet and because of the spread of ideas, and because of the spread of the dissemination of propaganda, but I'm seeing a return to big ecclesiasticism as a solution to, let's just say, want of faith or want of coherency among Christians. And it's disturbing because it's un-American. And like you said, with people who, they've got these long beards and they say, well, you better follow me or what else, or we're going to take over to America. People are going to get hung. We're going to set up a guillotine and we're going to start firing squads. That's un-American. And what that people are not protesting against that is very disturbing, because the principles upon which this country was founded include religious liberty, liberty of conscience, and freedom to worship according to the dictates of your own conscience.
Right. And I think you touched on something amazing here. It's not just about religion, it's about the culture of America. America is the culture of the radical individualist, the person who decides their own fate, which was different from Europe. Your fate was decided by your lord of whoever your fiefdom. You're just basically a worker in his little kingdom, and he could decide your entire fate. But you come to America, you have to decide what crop to plant, where to put your house, all these things. And I think what you're seeing, this change, is this whole push towards we're all in this together, fair share, and all this whole kind of we're all in this together concept, and it's almost bigotry to be an individual anymore, at least in America. So you got this whole move, and I think it is affecting our religious aspects as well as our culture in general. So not to delve too far into politics and culture, but I think it's coming together at the same point.
Yeah. And something else, I heard a Catholic minister talking about, he's using this word a lot in his sermons, disaffiliation. He said, and he acted like it was the worst possible thing in the world, disaffiliation, that Christians, nominal Christians, are disaffiliating from their, denominations. They're not going to churches often anymore. They're not, and he seems to think that it's a sign of some great, defection, apostasy. Maybe it's not, though. Maybe it's not quite that. Maybe it's that Christians are just getting sick of all the, sick of all the the shallowness and the superficialness.
Well, and then after COVID too. I mean, all these churches shut down, and we were told before that by a lot of these churches, you had to be in church every Sunday to get fed. Well, for 2 years, a lot of those same churches shut down. I'm not saying they should have opened up, but a lot of them shut down, and nobody was getting fed. So what happened? Did you not care about feeding people then? I don't quite get it. And so a lot of people probably became like, well, I don't think you're right. So there's all these things are going on, like you said. There's so many aspects that's causing people to get disassociated with their denominations and their church.
Yeah. It's too bad. The problem with that is, though, is you're getting the rise of these big churches, the Roman Catholic Church now. And I don't like to keep harping on the Roman Catholic Church, but like I said, I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and I already know they're full of beans. So the Roman Catholic Church, they've got this huge structure, and they're trying to build it with the blood of all kinds of, just dirty blood money from around the world, oppressing third world countries. Anyways, it's not the answer, because if you're placing faith in a sacrament and a ritual, well, that's going to, that is no substitute for faith-driven, a faith-driven relationship with God. If you're just waiting for the next time which you could get that glass of wine or that piece of bread, I dare not call it a wafer. I was excoriated for that by somebody online. But this is not. If you really feel that Christ is in a piece of bread and you're eating his literal flesh, then this is the basis. This is what your faith is all about. It's not about, believing in he's the Son of God and believing that his words are true and then trying to apply his teachings to your life. It's about going to the mass and getting that piece of bread. And so this is important. It's counter to everything that the Reformation intended. Reformation intended to reform religion. And now you've got this pushback to high church ecclesiasticism. I don't like it. I think it's wrong. But then, like you said, you've also got these people that are like the radical reformers over here. And even William Vincent chimed in on this. He said, you got people that are more new age now, and they're going to, just me and my Bible, personal interpretation. So I think there is a middle ground. I think there's a middle ground, but the middle ground has to meet people in the middle.
And it has to be decided by each individual. Unfortunately, we can't say how far is too far for anyone. Obviously, like you said, the fruits will tell that. If you've gone too far, you'll find out. Hey, sin no longer. There's no more judgment. I can do all I want. That you'll figure out you've gone too far at some point in your life, if that's your conclusion doctrinally. So
I think you go too far when you start losing your practical Christianities, when you go too far, we start getting angry, because I deal with people almost every day, and some of them are full preterists and some of them are on the fence. But it seems like they're angry. They're very angry. They're angry at everybody. They're angry at politics. They're angry at, at futurism. They're angry at the church. They're angry. If your Christianity's making you like that all the time, and that's a time that you need to step back and reassess your faith.
If you find yourself using words like "I challenge," "I can win every debate," "I beat that person," if you find yourself using these kind of words when you're interacting with fellow Christians or anybody's ideologically acting, then you might want to question, why am I so? It is a form of anger, and it's also a form of egotism. When you talk about, I can challenge, I can beat this person debate, they can't withstand me, I'm too great, and blah. If you're talking like that, you might need to humble yourself and take a step back, no matter what you believe in.
That's true. As a matter of fact, I had a Catholic priest tell me a long time ago, humility is a good thing. He told me. He probably saw that I was an arrogant young man. He told me, he said, humility is a good thing. Just remember that, humble, God does send his blessings to the humble. And it took me a long time to realize that. But over the past, 49 years of my life, I do have realized that humility will get you places. In the eyes of the world, it may not. It may put you behind, nice guys finish last and all that. But in the grand final scheme of things, going to get you places. Now, who likes to deal with someone? Who likes to hang out with someone who's always boasting? Well, I did this, I did that. I'm the greatest. Hey, nobody can beat me in a debate. Nobody likes dealing with those people. We tolerate them, but we don't invite them over for dinner.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I agree. And it become a spectacle of themselves. Even if they're right, and even if they win the debate and their arguments are all in line, their theology is perfect, who wants to be around that? That becomes to the point where it leaves a bad taste in your soul, not your mouth, but your soul, when you're hanging around people like that and they behave that way. So and what you said, the meek inherit the world. I've tried to be humble is the fact that, so what? You might not get it, but at least you'll be at peace. You were talking about anger all the time. These people seem to be always angry and at angst and hostile and ready to fight. I just want to be I'm 50. I'm getting ready to be 55. I just want to be at peace as much as possible with my fellow. I think it's biblical too. So,
right, it certainly is. It's peace is a good thing. Follow peace. with
Mhm.
all men. I think that's great. Well, what do you think about the religious leaders? What do you think about the priests and the pontiffs and the clergy that don't seem to have a lot of peace in their lives? We talked about the common people, and we said, well, the common Bible student oftentimes seems like he's at war with everyone. We have all these debates happening. We have all these boastings and swellings and tumults and whatnot. What do you think of the people that we were just talking about before? The people, the bearded people and the people with the phony British accents and these people, the ivory tower people. Seems like they don't have much peace either. They're challenging people to debates. They're writing books. They're issuing their challenges. What about those people? Are they doing damage to the popular conscience by engaging in, say, less than spiritual behavior, or are those bad? Is that bad leadership? Um,
Yeah, I know my sister has, she before last year, she probably didn't know what the word preterist was, but she's unfortunately through me has now seen some of the stuff that's going on just here recently again, popped up. As you know, I left that whole thing for a while. I didn't even write a book about preterism until 10 years later because first of all, I want to deconstruct what do I believe now? First thing, when I stopped hyper preterism, people first say, what do you believe now? Well, hopefully I can't tell you because if I know of suddenly what I believe now a day later, then something's wrong because I've believed preterism for 15 years. But my point is, my sister's when she saw these things, she goes, it just turns me off. All these debates and all these, it seems pointless. It seems petty that they're constantly fighting about every little detail. What I don't see any light in there. I don't see any conscience. So I think more and more these bearded ones and these clergy who think they're gonna, we're gonna set everybody right. They're turning people off who don't want to see that. They might have their own little people that stand behind them, go, oh, yeah, way to go. We got you. We got your back. But they're just going to be speaking to their own choir after a while. They're not going to get what they're supposed to be doing is obviously taking the gospel, the Great Commission. They're supposed to be doing these kind of things, and it's really just turning people off. So they're going to get their own. And I use this word cult sometimes. Oh, I'm not a cult. You got to have a dynamic leader that has a bunch of young women under. That's not a definition of cult. You could be a cult of one for that matter. So a cult is not necessarily just a dynamic. It's somebody who groups people in, and they all come around one person or one thought. Doesn't have to be a person. It could be a thought where they're all kind of right around that thing. In some respects, I hate to say this, or how many time do we have left? Don't want to open
we've
it.
got about 5 minutes.
Okay, we're not going to open that can of worms. But anyhow, so cults can happen even with one person or a group of people or a group or just an idea. And I think it'll continue on. Obviously, it's human nature. It's not going to go away. But more and more people are going to see it, and more people aren't going to see it. It's in general how the culture is going right now, whether it's politics or religion. You get more and more people duped, and you also get more and more people what they call red pilled, where they realize, oh, this is not right. I'm no longer believing this, and they go the completely other direction. So I think it's just going to go on and on. Obviously, theologically, we could talk about that, but we got 3 minutes to discuss eschatology, and I don't want to discuss that. We already got into that previously, but maybe that ends it all. Who knows?
Right. There's something I said earlier about about the state of Judaism. Is one thing that Judaism had to its advantage was even in the times of the greatest apostasy, there were still that 7,000 that did not bend their knee to Baal. They were a hidden people. Nobody really knew about their existence, but they were worshiping God. They were worshiping Him purely. They were worshiping Him the right way and with all sincerity of conscience. And yet they were the remnant in that nation during that time of great apostasy. So even though we have all this infighting, we have this confusion, we have this, doctrinal controversy going on, and we have also disaffiliation, people leaving Christianity, churches closing by the baker's dozen every day, we do have a hidden people who still do worship God in sincerity of conscience and with purity of doctrine. And maybe the remnant, if you will, within Christianity, maybe those are the ones that are going to get us through the next, through the most difficult phases ahead for the church. Because it seems like organized Christianity is falling apart at the seams. It's too bad that is, but it is how it is. So, Roderick, this has been a great talk. Do you have any last words, any words of wisdom that you'd like to impart to our hearers? I'll let you have the last word.
I think again, just rehearsing what Luther said. I mean, I think he nailed it. It's scripture, and it's plain reason and conscience. Put those three things together, and you'll be on the right path. If you think, hey, here's Scripture needs interpretation. People are, I have the best hermeneutic. I have the best exegesis. Well, this guy over here also has the best hermeneutic and best exegesis. Who resolves that? And then they here's my scholar, here's your scholar, and it never ends that way. So it really comes down to reading the scriptures, using plain reason, and having your conscience guide you. All those three things. That's how I'm going to live my life. If people want to chastise me for it, call me a heretic, they can, but that's how I'm going to live my life as a believer.
And I couldn't have put it any better than that. That's how I'm going to live my life too. It's how I've been living it for the past, gosh, I don't know, 20 years or so. Anyways, thank you for coming out, Roderick. It's always great talking to you. Hopefully you can weigh in soon. We're going to be looking forward to that new book that you're publishing. Any idea when it's going to come out?
I'm hoping by Christmas, because this will be the biggest book I've written so far. I want to pack it with lots of good stuff, and make sure it has lots of good research. So that's
wonderful.
Yep.
We'll be looking forward to it. I will try to be back here. I've got a couple of interviews lined up. Well, I'm lining them up. Let's put it that way. I'm in negotiations right now, trying to get people to come on. And I've got some other personal business to take care of this week and next week. So there's probably going to be a few interviews, but I got a guy named Eric Hall that I want to get on. He believes all prophecy ended in 164 BC, and he uses audience relevance to arrive at that conclusion. I may have an interview with some other IO adherents, possibly with another full preterist or two. Try to get some other folks to interview. If you know of anybody who would like to participate in a podcast discussion, please have them email me. You can find my email in the channel description. Until then, thanks again for your thoughts, your comments, your observations, your critiques. It's all very appreciated. Have a wonderful evening, great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.